In the cold silence of space where stars burned like distant candles and planets drifted aimlessly in the endless void, humanity's dreams of conquest had turned to nightmares. The once mighty human empire was on its knees, pushed back by an alien coalition that seemed unstoppable. For decades, these aliens, known only as the Vorthak, had waged war across the galaxy, their ships faster, their weapons deadlier, and their strategies more cunning than anything humanity could muster. Amidst this chaos, there existed a ship that no one wanted to talk about. It wasn't because it had been destroyed or lost in battle. No, the shame came from something far worse. It was still around. The Aegis, an old warship built during a time when humans thought they were invincible, now served as a grim reminder of how quickly things could fall apart. Its hull was scarred with dents and patches, its engines groaned under the strain of even the simplest maneuvers, and its weapon systems often failed at the worst possible moments. Once hailed as a marvel of engineering, the Aegis had become nothing more than a joke among the fleet, a relic of better days long gone. Commander Ethan Hayes stood on the bridge of the Aegis, staring out at the swirling emptiness beyond the viewport. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Just 2 weeks earlier, he'd been commanding one of the newer cruisers, leading missions that actually mattered. Now, here he was, stuck aboard a ship everyone considered useless. Fleet Command hadn't even bothered to sugarcoat it. They'd told him straight up that his new assignment was low priority. Low priority meant boring patrols in sectors so remote they didn't even appear on most star maps. Low priority meant being forgotten. Ethan sighed and turned away from the viewport. At least he wasn't alone in his misery. His crew was just as mismatched as the ship itself. There was Lieutenant Clara Bennett, a young engineer whose brilliance was matched only by her lack of experience. She spent most of her time buried in repair manuals, trying to keep the Aegis's ancient systems running despite their constant failures. Then there was Ensign Ryan Cole, a hot-headed pilot who'd barely graduated from the academy. Rumor had it he'd gotten into fights with instructors and nearly flunked out multiple times before finally earning his wings. And finally, there was Chief Petty Officer Daniel Pierce, a grizzled veteran who seemed to have accepted that his career was over. He shuffled through his duties with a permanent scowl, muttering curses under his breath whenever something broke, which was often. The rest of the crew fell somewhere between those extremes, rookies eager to prove themselves, burnouts looking for an easy ride until retirement, and a handful of misfits who'd been transferred here after screwing up elsewhere. None of them believed they were part of anything important. Hell, Ethan wasn't even sure he believed it anymore. "Commander," Clara said, snapping him out of his thoughts. She approached hesitantly, holding a datapad in both hands. "I've finished running diagnostics on the propulsion system. It's not good." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How bad?" Clara hesitated, clearly uncomfortable delivering bad news. "If we push the engines past half power, there's a 70% chance they'll overload. And even at half power, we're lucky if we can maintain stable flight for more than 12 hours without needing repairs." "Great," Ethan muttered. "Anything else?" "Well," Clara glanced down at her datapad, then back up at him. "The targeting array is still offline. I managed to patch it temporarily, but it's going to fail again during our next engagement. If we ever get into one." Ethan nodded slowly. "Thanks for letting me know. Keep working on it." "Yes, sir," Clara replied, giving a quick salute before hurrying off the bridge. As she left, Ethan leaned against the railing, rubbing his temples. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. When he joined the military, he'd dreamed of commanding sleek, powerful ships on daring missions. Instead, he was stuck babysitting a floating junkyard. Still, he reminded himself someone had to do it. Even if the Aegis was useless, it was still part of the fleet. Someone had to make sure it didn't completely fall apart. The intercom crackled to life, breaking the silence. "Bridge, this is Cole." Ryan's voice came through, laced with irritation. "We're picking up some weird readings out here. Looks like debris, but it's moving funny." Ethan frowned. "Define funny." "It's hard to explain, sir. Just come take a look." With a sigh, Ethan headed toward the cockpit. When he arrived, Ryan was already seated at the controls, his fingers flying over the console as he adjusted the sensors. On the main screen, a cluster of objects floated lazily against the backdrop of stars. They looked like pieces of wreckage at first glance, but something about them felt off. "What am I looking at?" Ethan asked. Ryan pointed to the screen. "See those energy signatures? That's not normal for driftwood. Whatever this stuff is, it's giving off low-level radiation. Could be dangerous." Ethan studied the readings carefully. Ryan was right. It didn't look like ordinary debris, but what else could it be? A trap? A malfunctioning sensor? Or maybe, just maybe, it was something valuable. "Bring us closer," Ethan ordered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." "Aye, sir," Ryan replied, guiding the ship toward the mysterious objects. As the Aegis drew nearer, the truth began to reveal itself. The debris wasn't random at all. It was part of a larger structure, fragmented but unmistakable. It was alien, clearly belonging to the Vorthak. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. What were the odds of stumbling across something like this way out here? "Sir?" Clara called from behind him. She must have followed him to the cockpit. This isn't just debris. Look at the patterns. These fragments are components of a weapon, or maybe a communication device. If we can salvage it, we might learn something about their technology." Ethan hesitated. Taking alien tech was risky business. Fleet Command would likely order them to leave it alone, citing safety concerns. But the opportunity was too tempting to ignore. If they could figure out how the Vorthak's weapons worked, they might gain an edge in the war. "All right," Ethan said finally. "Let's bring it aboard. But be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." Clara nodded eagerly, already pulling up schematics on her datapad. "I'll prep the cargo bay. We'll need containment fields ready in case it's unstable. And you," Ethan said, turning to Ryan. "Keep an eye out for hostiles. If the Vorthak find out we're poking around their garbage, they won't hesitate to blow us out of the sky." Ryan smirked. "Don't worry, Commander. I'll make sure we stay in one piece." As the crew sprang into action, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, the Aegis wasn't completely useless after all. The Aegis drifted silently through the void, its battered hull casting long shadows across the debris field. Inside the cargo bay, Lieutenant Clara Bennett worked tirelessly to secure the mysterious alien artifact. The object was roughly the size of a small car, its surface covered in intricate patterns that glowed faintly with an otherworldly light. Despite its damaged state, it radiated an eerie energy that made Clara's skin crawl. "This thing gives me the creeps," muttered Chief Petty Officer Daniel Pierce as he helped position the containment field around the artifact. His gruff voice echoed off the metal walls of the cargo bay. "Feels like it's watching us." Clara glanced at him but didn't respond. She couldn't blame him for feeling uneasy. The artifact had a strange presence, almost as if it were alive. But she couldn't let fear get in the way. This was their chance to learn something about the Vorthak, and possibly turn the tide of the war. With careful precision, she adjusted the settings on her scanner, trying to decipher the faint energy signatures emanating from the object. "Containment field is stable," she announced after a few moments. "Let's move it to the lab so I can run a full analysis." Ethan Hayes stood nearby, arms crossed as he observed the operation. He trusted Clara's expertise, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. Bringing alien tech aboard the ship was risky, especially when they didn't fully understand what it was capable of. Still, he knew they couldn't pass up the opportunity. If there was even a chance this artifact could give them an edge against the Vorthak, it was worth the risk. "All right," Ethan said finally. "Get it to the lab, and keep me updated on your progress." "Yes, sir," Clara replied, already, heading toward the lift with a team of technicians trailing behind her. In the lab, Clara got to work immediately. The artifact sat securely within a reinforced containment chamber, its glowing patterns pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. Clara hooked up a series of diagnostic tools, feeding data into her workstation as she tried to make sense of the readings. Hours passed and frustration began to creep in. The artifact's technology was unlike anything she'd ever seen, advanced beyond human comprehension, yet strangely familiar. It's not just a weapon, she murmured to herself as lines of code scrolled across her screen. It's connected, like it's part of a larger system. Her eyes widened as she pieced together fragments of alien text buried deep within the artifact's programming. It wasn't designed to attack directly. Instead, it acted as a key, a bridge between different technologies. The implications were staggering. If she could unlock its secrets, they might be able to integrate it with the Aegis systems, giving the old ship capabilities far beyond its original design. But as Clara dug deeper, strange things began happening. The lights in the lab flickered, intermittently, casting the room in shadow. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation, forcing her to reboot systems repeatedly. At one point, she swore she heard a low hum coming from the artifact, though no one else seemed to notice. "Lieutenant?" A voice called from behind her. It was Ensign Ryan Cole, leaning casually against the doorway. "Everything okay in here? You've been holed up for hours." Clara turned to face him, brushing a strand of hair out of her eyes. "I'm fine, just focused. This thing is more complicated than I thought." Ryan stepped closer, peering curiously at the artifact. "What exactly are we dealing with?" "I'm not sure yet," Clara admitted. "But I think it's some kind of interface. Maybe a control device for their ships. If I can figure out how it works, we might be able to use it against them." Ryan frowned, his usual cockiness replaced by unease. "You really think that's a good idea? Messing with alien tech never ends well." "We don't have a choice," Clara said firmly. "If we want to win this war, we need every advantage we can get." Ryan didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue either. Instead, he lingered awkwardly for a moment before speaking again. "Just be careful, okay? This whole situation feels off." Clara nodded absently, already turning back to her work. She appreciated Ryan's concern, but she couldn't afford distractions. Every second counted, and the artifact held answers they desperately needed. As the hours stretched into days, the effects of the artifact became harder to ignore. Strange occurrences spread throughout the ship, affecting both equipment and crew. Lights dimmed and brightened unpredictably. Communication channels crackled with static, cutting off mid-conversation. Even the engines began acting up, sputtering and stalling despite Clara's best efforts to keep them running smoothly. The crew grew restless, their nerves fraying under the weight of uncertainty. Arguments broke out over minor issues, tempers flaring where none had existed before. Some claimed to hear whispers in the corridors, soft, indistinct voices that vanished whenever anyone tried to investigate. Others reported vivid dreams filled with shadowy figures and cryptic warnings. Ethan noticed the growing tension and decided to address it head-on. He gathered the senior staff in the briefing room, determined to find out what was going on. "All right," he said, standing at the head of the table. "I want to know what's happening on my ship. Someone start talking." Clara hesitated, then spoke up. "I think it's the artifact. It's interfering with our system somehow. I've been trying to isolate the problem, but it's adapting, changing itself to stay ahead of us." "And the crew?" Ethan asked, looking around the room. "That's harder to explain," Clara admitted. "Some people are reporting hallucinations, paranoia, even memory lapses. I don't know if it's psychological or if the artifact is actually affecting their minds." Daniel snorted derisively. "Sounds like hogwash to me. Machines don't mess with your brain. We're just tired, stressed, and letting our imaginations run wild." "It's not imagination," Ryan interjected sharply. "I felt it too, like something's crawling inside my head, whispering things I can't quite hear. And don't tell me I'm imagining that." The room fell silent, the weight of Ryan's words sinking in. Ethan studied each face carefully, searching for signs of doubt or denial. None came. Whatever was happening, it was real, and it was getting worse. "Clara," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "How close are you to figuring this thing out?" "I'm making progress," she replied cautiously. "But it's slow. The artifact's programming is incredibly complex, and I'm working blind most of the time. I need more time." "You may not have it," Ethan warned. If this thing keeps spreading, it could tear the crew apart. Or worse, take control of the ship. Clara swallowed hard, nodding in understanding. I'll do everything I can, Commander, but I can't promise anything. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. He hated being in situations like this, forced to gamble with lives, based on incomplete information. Still, he had faith in Clara. If anyone could unravel the artifact's secrets, it was her. Keep me updated, he said finally. And if anything changes, let me know immediately. Yes, sir, Clara replied, rising from her seat. As the meeting dispersed, Ethan stayed behind, staring at the empty chairs around the table. The Aegis had always been a flawed ship, but now it carried something far more dangerous than outdated technology. For better or worse, they were committed to seeing this through. All they could do now was hope they weren't walking into a trap. Back in the lab, Clara resumed her work with renewed determination. The artifact pulsed steadily in its containment chamber, its glow growing brighter with each passing hour. Clara ignored the creeping unease in her chest, focusing instead on the task at hand. Somewhere within those glowing patterns lay the key to unlocking its power, and perhaps saving the Aegis from destruction. She didn't notice the faint hum growing louder, or the way the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch unnaturally. Her mind was consumed by numbers, codes, and possibilities. Outside the lab, the ship creaked and groaned, its aging frame straining under the weight of forces it wasn't meant to endure. But somewhere deep inside the artifact, something stirred. The hum grew louder. Lieutenant Clara Bennett didn't notice it at first. Her focus was entirely on the artifact, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she deciphered fragments of alien code. The glowing patterns on the artifact's surface pulsed faster now, almost in sync with her heartbeat. She leaned closer to the screen, squinting at a line of data that seemed to repeat itself, a sequence of symbols unlike anything she'd seen before. This has to mean something, she muttered under her breath, jotting down notes on a nearby tablet. It's not random, it's intentional. Her words were drowned out by a sudden, sharp crackle from the speakers mounted on the walls. The sound made her jump, and, for a moment, she thought the lab's power supply had failed again. But when she looked up, the lights were still on, flickering slightly, but steady enough. The hum returned, lower this time, resonating through the floor beneath her feet. Clara frowned. Something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on what. She glanced at the containment chamber, where the artifact sat securely encased. Its glow had intensified, spilling faintly onto the surrounding equipment. It almost looked alive. Focus, she whispered to herself, shaking off the unease. There was no time for distractions. Every second counted. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Commander Ethan Hayes paced back and forth like a caged animal. Reports of strange occurrences continued to trickle in from every corner of the ship. Crew members spoke of shadows moving where none should be, of whispers echoing in empty corridors, and of machines behaving erratically without explanation. Even Daniel Pierce, who rarely showed emotion, had admitted to feeling uneasy during his routine maintenance checks. Ethan hated the uncertainty. He was used to dealing with problems he could see or touch, broken engines, malfunctioning weapons, enemy ships bearing down on them. But this was different. Whatever was happening aboard the Aegis defied logic, and that made it all the more dangerous. Commander, Ryan Cole's voice broke through his thoughts. The young pilot stood at the helm, his usual swagger replaced by a tense alertness. We've got another issue. Navigation systems are acting up again. If we don't stabilize them soon, we risk drifting off course. Ethan sighed, running, a hand through his hair. Tell Clara I need updates on the artifact stat. And keep an eye on those nav systems. We can't afford to lose control of the ship. Ryan nodded and relayed the message, though his expression suggested he doubted Clara could fix anything right now. Everyone aboard the Aegis felt the weight of the situation pressing down on them. The ship wasn't just falling apart. It was unraveling in ways no one understood. Back in the lab, Clara finally cracked part of the artifact's code. Her eyes widened as the meaning of the repeating sequence became clear. It wasn't just a key. It was instructions, detailed, precise instructions for integrating the artifact with existing technology, specifically with the Aegis. "This is insane," she murmured, scrolling through the translated data. According to the code, the artifact wasn't meant to destroy. Instead, it was designed to enhance, to unlock hidden potential within compatible systems. The implications were staggering. If she followed the instructions, the Aegis could become something far greater than its original design allowed. But there was a catch. The artifact required direct access to the ship's core systems. To integrate it fully, Clara would have to bypass multiple safety protocols and override manual controls. Doing so carried enormous risks. If something went wrong, it could cripple the ship or worse. Clara hesitated, staring at the artifact. Its glow seemed to pulse expectantly, as if urging her forward. For a brief moment, she considered abandoning the project altogether. What if this was exactly what the Vorthak wanted? What if activating the artifact gave them a way to track the Aegis? "No," she said aloud, steeling herself. "If we don't try, we'll never know what it can do, and if we don't take risks, we're already dead." With trembling hands, Clara initiated the integration process. She entered commands into the console, watching as lines of code streamed across the monitor. The artifact responded immediately, its glow intensifying until it filled the entire lab. A low vibration coursed through the floor, growing stronger with each passing second. Outside the lab, the effects were immediate. Lights flickered wildly throughout the ship, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Equipment short-circuited, sparks flying as circuits overloaded. Crew members stumbled through the corridors, disoriented and panicked. On the bridge, alarms blared, warning of critical system failures. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan demanded, gripping the railing as the ship shuddered violently. "Clara, report! I'm working on it!" Clara shouted back over the intercom, her voice strained. "Just hold on." Inside the lab, the artifact's energy surged, flooding the containment chamber and spilling into the surrounding systems. Clara shielded her face as waves of light engulfed the room, blinding her temporarily. When the brightness faded, she lowered her arm cautiously, blinking against the after-images burned into her vision. The lab was unrecognizable. Equipment that moments ago had been outdated and failing now gleamed with a sleek metallic finish. Monitors displayed streams of data faster than Clara could process, and the air hummed with a newfound vitality. The artifact itself had transformed, its surface smooth and reflective, pulsing steadily with a soft blue light. "It worked," Clara whispered, awestruck. It actually worked. The transformation spread rapidly, coursing through the Aegis like a shockwave. Aging hull plates shimmered and hardened, becoming impenetrable barriers. Engines roared to life, their output increasing exponentially. Weapons systems came online, revealing capabilities far beyond anything humanity currently possessed. The once clunky controls of the ship responded instantly, as if anticipating the crew's every move. On the bridge, Ethan watched in disbelief as the monitors lit up with new readouts. The Aegis was no longer the same ship. It was faster, stronger, smarter. It was perfect. "Commander," Ryan said, his voice tinged with awe. "You need to see this." Ethan stepped closer to the main viewport, his jaw dropping as he took in the sight outside. The Aegis' exterior had undergone a complete overhaul. Its once dull gray hull now gleamed with a polished silver finish, accented by glowing blue veins that pulsed rhythmically along its length. Weapons turrets bristled menacingly, ready to unleash devastation at a moment's notice. "This is..." Ethan trailed off, unable to find the words. "Clara, what did you do?" "I unlocked its potential," Clara replied over the intercom, her tone equal parts excitement and exhaustion. "The artifact wasn't just a weapon, it was an upgrade. Everything about the Aegis has been enhanced. We're talking next-generation tech here." Ethan let out a slow breath, trying to process what he was hearing. The Aegis, once dismissed as useless, had become humanity's most advanced warship. The possibilities were endless, but so were the dangers. Before Ethan could respond, chaos erupted once again. The artifact's influence hadn't stopped with the ship's systems. Crew members began experiencing vivid hallucinations, seeing things that weren't there. Some claimed they heard voices whispering their names, while others reported feeling an overwhelming urge to sabotage the ship. Arguments broke out, tempers flaring as paranoia set in. "Clara," Ethan barked into the intercom. "What's happening to the crew?" "I don't know," Clara shouted back, her voice frantic. "The artifact's energy is spreading beyond the systems. It's affecting everyone." Ethan clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. They'd gained incredible power, but at what cost? If they couldn't contain the artifact's influence, it might tear the crew and the ship apart. "Find a way to stop it," Ethan ordered. "Now." Clara didn't respond, but Ethan knew she was already working on it. He turned back to the viewport, gazing at the transformed Aegis. For the first time in years, hope stirred within him. But it was fragile, balanced precariously, on the edge of disaster. If they couldn't regain control, the Aegis wouldn't just be useless, it would be deadly. The Aegis was no longer the same ship. Its sleek metallic exterior gleamed under the dim light of a distant star, and its engines thrummed with an energy that seemed almost alive. On the bridge, Commander Ethan Hayes stared at the monitors displaying the ship's new capabilities. Every system had been upgraded beyond imagination, weapons more powerful than anything humanity possessed, shields capable of withstanding even the heaviest bombardments, and sensors so advanced they could detect threats before they materialized. But none of that mattered if the crew fell apart. Ethan clenched his fists as he listened to the chaos unfolding around him. Voices shouted in the corridors, arguments erupted over trivial matters, and some crew members refused to follow orders altogether. The artifact's influence wasn't limited to machines, it was seeping into their minds, twisting thoughts and emotions until trust became impossible. Even Daniel Pierce, usually stoic and unshakable, had snapped at a junior officer for no reason, leaving the younger man visibly shaken. "Commander," Ryan Cole called from the helm, breaking Ethan's train of thought. "We've got incoming signals, multiple contacts approaching fast." Ethan turned sharply toward the main screen. Sure enough, blips appeared on the radar, dozens of them closing in rapidly. The Vorthak fleet had found them. "Battle stations," Ethan barked, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Everyone get to your posts. Now." The bridge erupted into action. Officers scrambled to their consoles, shouting updates as the enemy ships drew nearer. Despite the panic gripping the crew, there was still discipline left in them. They knew what was at stake. If the Vorthak discovered the artifact and the Aegis's newfound power, they would stop at nothing to destroy it. In the lab, Clara Bennett worked furiously to contain the artifact's spread. Sweat dripped down her face as she typed commands into her workstation, trying to create a firewall between the artifact's energy and the crew's neural pathways. But the artifact resisted every attempt to isolate it. Its glow pulsed erratically, almost mocking her efforts. "This isn't working," she muttered, slamming her fist against the desk in frustration. "I can't shut it down without disabling the upgrades entirely." Her mind raced. She couldn't afford to lose the enhancements. The Aegis needed them to survive the impending battle. But neither could she allow the artifact to continue corrupting the crew. There had to be another way. An idea struck her, a risky one. If she rerouted the artifact's energy flow, she might be able to redirect its influence away from the crew and back into the ship's systems. It would buy them time, but it came with a cost. The artifact's presence would grow stronger within the Aegis, making it harder to remove later. And if something went wrong, the entire ship could overload. Clara hesitated only for a moment before deciding. They didn't have the luxury of caution anymore. She entered the necessary commands, her hands trembling as she activated the sequence. The artifact reacted violently, its glow flaring brighter than ever. Sparks flew from nearby equipment, and the hum grew deafening, vibrating through the floor and walls. Then, abruptly, the noise stopped. Clara let out a shaky breath, leaning back in her chair. For now, the artifact's influence on the crew had lessened. Whether it would last long enough to make a difference remained to be seen. On the bridge, Ethan watched as the first wave of Vorthak ships entered visual range. Their angular designs and jagged edges made them look like predators circling prey. Each vessel bristled with weapons, their glowing red tips aimed directly at the Aegis. "They're hailing us," Ryan said, his voice tight with anticipation. "What do you want me to do?" "Put them on screen," Ethan replied, stepping forward. He straightened his posture, forcing himself to appear calm despite the knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The main viewport flickered to life, revealing the face of a Vorthak commander. Its features were sharp and insect-like, with multiple eyes scanning the humans coldly. Behind it, rows of alien operators moved with mechanical precision, preparing for battle. "You are trespassing in restricted space," the Vorthak commander said in a guttural tone, its words translated by the ship's comm system. "Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Ethan met the creature's gaze without flinching. "We're not surrendering, you picked the wrong ship to mess with." The Vorthak commander tilted its head slightly, as if amused. "Your primitive vessel stands no chance against our forces. Cease resistance and save yourselves unnecessary suffering." Before Ethan could respond, the transmission cut off, replaced by a barrage of plasma fire. The Aegis rocked violently as the first shots hit its shields, sending sparks flying across the bridge. Alarms blared and officers shouted updates as the enemy closed in. "Return fire," Ethan ordered, gripping the railing tightly. "Show them what we're made of." Ryan didn't need to be told twice. His fingers danced over the controls, unleashing the Aegis's upgraded weapons for the first time. A stream of blue energy shot out from the ship's cannons, striking a Vorthak cruiser with devastating force. The alien vessel exploded in a brilliant flash, debris scattering across the void. Cheers erupted on the bridge, but Ethan silenced them with a raised hand. "Stay focused. This isn't over yet." He was right. The remaining Vorthak ships adjusted their tactics, splitting into smaller groups to surround the Aegis. Plasma bolts rained down from all sides, testing the limits of the ship's enhanced shields. Explosions lit up the darkness outside, filling the viewport with flashes of light. "Shields holding at 60%, an officer reported. "But they're targeting our engines. We won't last much longer if this keeps up." Ethan gritted his teeth, searching for a solution. The Aegis was powerful, but it couldn't fight endlessly against overwhelming odds. They needed a plan, and... "Fast, Clara," he said into the intercom. "We need options. What else can this ship do?" There was a pause before Clara's voice crackled through the speakers. "I'm uploading tactical data to your console now. The artifact's integration unlocked experimental maneuvers. Try using the gravity pulse generator. It'll create a shockwave that could disable their weapons temporarily." "Gravity? Pulse?" Ethan repeated, glancing at the new controls appearing on his screen. "Got it, everyone, brace yourselves." With a deep breath, Ethan activated the maneuver. The Aegis shuddered as energy built up within its core, radiating outward in a massive wave. When released, the pulse rippled through space, distorting the trajectories of nearby Vorthak ships and knocking several of them off course. For a brief moment, the enemy attack faltered, giving the Aegis a critical opening. "Now!" Ethan shouted. "Hit them while they're vulnerable." The crew responded instantly, launching a coordinated assault that crippled half the remaining Vorthak fleet. Alien ships exploded one after another, their wreckage drifting silently through the void. The tide of the battle had shifted dramatically, but victory was far from assured. As the fighting continued, cracks began to show in the Aegis's defenses. Shields dropped below 30%, and damage reports flooded in from every section of the ship. Fires broke out in the lower decks and wounded crew members filled the medical bay. Even with the artifact's enhancements, the Aegis couldn't endure endless punishment. Ethan's mind raced. They needed an edge, a way to end the battle decisively before the Vorthak regrouped. Then he remembered something Clara had mentioned earlier, the artifact's connection to the ship's core systems. If they pushed the Aegis to its absolute limit, maybe they could unleash a final, devastating attack. "Clara," Ethan said urgently into the intercom, "can we overload the artifact's energy output? Use it to wipe out the rest of the fleet?" Another pause, longer this time. When Clara spoke, her voice was hesitant. "It's possible, but it'll fry most of our systems in the process. We'd win the battle, but we'd barely have enough left to limp home. Ethan closed his eyes, weighing the decision. Sacrificing the ship might mean losing everything they'd gained, but losing the battle meant certain death. There was no other choice. Do it, he said firmly. Prepare the artifact for maximum output. We'll finish this. Yes, sir, Clara replied, her tone resolute despite the danger. Minutes later, the Aegis positioned itself at the center of the remaining Vorthak ships. Its core glowed brighter than ever, feeding energy into the artifact at an unsustainable rate. The hum returned, louder and more intense, vibrating through every inch of the ship. Fire in 10 seconds, Ethan announced, gripping the railing tightly. Hold on. The countdown began, each second stretching endlessly. Outside, the Vorthak ships realized too late what was about to happen. Plasma bolts streaked toward the Aegis, but it was already too late. When the artifact reached critical mass, it unleashed a blinding burst of energy that engulfed the battlefield. Alien ships disintegrated instantly, reduced to nothing more, then scattered fragments. The shockwave traveled outward, silencing the void in its wake. Inside the Aegis, alarms screamed as systems failed one by one. Lights flickered and died, plunging the ship into darkness. Smoke filled the corridors and the air grew thick with heat. But somehow, the core held together. Barely. Ethan slumped against the railing, exhaustion washing over him. They had won, but at a tremendous cost. The Aegis was battered and broken, its once mighty upgrades now little more than memories. For better or worse, the warship they called useless had proven its worth. The silence aboard the Aegis was deafening. After the chaos of battle, the ship now drifted quietly through space, its battered frame groaning under the strain of survival. Smoke curled lazily from damaged consoles, and emergency lights cast long shadows across the corridors. The crew moved cautiously, their faces pale and drawn, some clutching injuries they couldn't yet treat. Victory had come at a price, a steep one. Commander Ethan Hayes stood on the bridge, staring blankly at the viewport. Outside, the remnants of the Vorthak fleet floated lifelessly in the void, reduced to drifting wreckage by the artifacts. Devastating pulse. It was a sight that should have filled him with pride, but all he felt was exhaustion. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the railing, his mind replaying the events that had brought them here. They'd won, yes, but how much longer could they keep going like this? Commander. Clara Bennett's voice came over the intercom, breaking the heavy quiet. I've finished assessing the damage. I don't know how to say this, but it's bad. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment before responding. How bad? The core systems are barely holding together, Clara explained, her tone strained. The artifact overloaded everything. Shields are down completely, engines are running at 20% capacity, and most of our weapons are offline. We're lucky the hull didn't breach when we fired that pulse. Ethan let out a slow breath. What about repairs? Can we patch things up enough to make it back to base? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Clara spoke again, her voice carried a note of hesitation. Maybe. But it'll take time. And resources we don't have. We used every spare part just keeping the ship operational during the fight. If something else goes wrong. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan understood what she meant. Without proper repairs, the Aegis wouldn't survive another encounter. Not with enemy ships, not even with an asteroid field. They were stranded, limping along in hostile territory, and help might never arrive. All right, Ethan said finally. Start prioritizing repairs. Focus on the engines first. If we can't move, we're sitting ducks out here. Yes, sir, Clara replied. Her voice sounded weary but determined. She disconnected the call, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. In the lab, Clara worked tirelessly alongside Daniel Pierce and a handful of technicians. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the faint glow of handheld tools and flickering monitors. Sparks flew as they welded cracked panels and rerouted damaged circuits, their movements mechanical and efficient despite their fatigue. Clara's mind raced as she tried to calculate which systems were essential for survival and which could wait. You look like you're carrying the weight of the galaxy on your shoulders, Daniel remarked dryly, handing her a wrench. His usual, gruff demeanor had softened somewhat, though his sarcasm remained intact. Clara managed a weak smile. Feels like it sometimes. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You did good, kid. Whatever happens next, we wouldn't be alive if it weren't for you. Clara shook her head. I'm not so sure about that. This whole mess started because of me. If I hadn't integrated the artifact into the ship, don't start second-guessing yourself, Daniel interrupted firmly. We made choices, yeah, but we made them to survive. That's all anyone can do out here. Clara nodded silently, focusing back on the task at hand. Daniel was right. They'd done what they had to. Still, the guilt lingered, gnawing at the edges of her resolve. The artifact's influence still pulsed faintly within the ship, its energy refusing to fade entirely. Every time she looked at it, she wondered if they'd truly contained it, or if it was simply biding its time. On the lower decks, Ensign Ryan Cole wandered aimlessly through the corridors, his boots echoing softly against the metal floor. The adrenaline rush from the battle had worn off, replaced by a hollow emptiness. He stopped near a porthole, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars. For once, his usual bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet introspection. Hey. Ryan turned, to see Lieutenant Clara approaching, her face streaked with grease and sweat. She offered him a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. How are you holding up? She asked. Ryan shrugged. Could be worse. Could also be better. Clara nodded knowingly. Tell me about it. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. Do you think we're going to make it back? Clara hesitated, weighing her words carefully. Honestly, I don't know, but I'm not giving up until we do. Ryan studied her for a moment, then grinned faintly. Guess that's why you're the brains of the operation. Clara chuckled softly, though it sounded forced. And you're the reckless idiot who keeps flying us into danger. Yeah, well, Ryan said, leaning against the wall. Someone's got to keep things interesting around here. Despite the levity, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were survivors clinging to hope in a universe that seemed determined to tear them apart, and for now that was enough. Back on the bridge, Ethan reviewed the latest status reports. The situation was grim, but not hopeless. With careful rationing, they had enough fuel and supplies to last a few more days. If they could get the engines back to full power, they might stand a chance of reaching a nearby outpost or relay station. It wasn't much, but it was something. Commander, Ryan called from the helm. We've got a problem. Ethan turned sharply. What is it? Ryan pointed to the radar screen. A single blip had appeared, moving steadily toward their position. At first glance, it looked harmless. Just another piece of debris, but something about it felt off. It's small, Ryan said, frowning. But it's accelerating faster than anything natural should. Ethan's stomach tightened. Isolate the signal. Let's find out what we're dealing with. As the scanners focused on the object, its shape became clearer. It wasn't debris. It was a drone, sleek and angular, bearing markings consistent with the Vorthak. Ethan cursed under his breath. Of course they'd sent scouts to investigate the destruction of their fleet. Prep whatever weapons we have left, Ethan ordered. If it gets too close, we'll take it out. Ryan nodded, already working the controls, but before they could act, the drone transmitted a message. The main screen flickered to life, displaying text written in jagged alien script. They're demanding surrender, Ryan translated, saying they'll destroy us if we resist. Ethan clenched his jaw. Surrender wasn't an option, not after everything they'd been through, but fighting wasn't much better. The Aegis was in no condition for another battle. Send a reply, Ethan said finally. Tell them we're not interested. Ryan raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? No, Ethan admitted. But bluffing is all we've got left. The message was sent, and for a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the drone launched a volley of plasma bolts. The Aegis rocked violently as the shot struck its weakened shields, sending sparks flying across the bridge. "Return fire!" Ethan shouted. Ryan complied, unleashing the last of the ship's functional cannons. The blast hit the drone square on, obliterating it in a flash of light. Cheers erupted briefly among the crew, but they quickly faded as reality set in. The attack confirmed their worst fears. The Vorthak knew where they were and reinforcements would likely follow. "We need to move," Ethan said urgently. "Now." Hours later, the Aegis limped forward, its engines sputtering but still functional. Clara and her team had managed to stabilize the core systems temporarily, buying them precious time. The crew worked tirelessly, patching holes and rerouting power wherever possible. Exhaustion hung heavy in the air, but no one complained. They were too busy surviving. Ethan paced the bridge, his mind racing. They couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, their luck would run out. But for now, they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower and the stubborn refusal to give up. As the ship drifted further into the unknown, Clara returned to the lab. The artifact sat silently in its containment chamber, its glow dimmer than before but still present. She stared at it, her expression unreadable. "What are you hiding?" she whispered. "What else can you do?" For a brief moment, she thought. She saw the artifact pulse faintly, almost as if responding to her question. Shaking her head, she turned away and got back to work. Whatever secrets the artifact held, they would remain buried, for now. Outside, the stars burned brightly, indifferent to the struggles of those who sailed among them. The Aegis continued onward, battered but unbroken, carrying the hopes of its crew into the vastness of space. The Aegis drifted silently through the void, its battered hull groaning under the strain of survival. The crew worked tirelessly, patching leaks, rerouting power, and keeping the ship's fragile systems alive. Each hour felt like a lifetime. As they pushed forward, their destination unknown but their resolve unshaken. For Commander Ethan Hayes, the weight of leadership pressed heavier than ever. He had led them into chaos, and now it was up to him to guide them out. On the bridge, Ryan Cole sat at the helm, his hands hovering over the controls. His usual cockiness had faded, replaced by a quiet determination. The radar screen flickered, intermittently, searching for any sign of pursuit or salvation. So far, the emptiness around them remained unbroken. "Anything yet?" Ethan asked, his voice low and weary. Ryan shook his head. "Nothing, just stars and silence." Ethan sighed, leaning against the railing. They couldn't afford to stop moving, not with the Vorthak likely hunting them. But without proper repairs, the Aegis wouldn't last much longer. Every decision felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. In the lab, Clara Bennett continued her work on the artifact. Its glow had dimmed significantly since the battle, but she could still feel its presence, a faint hum that resonated deep within her chest. She wasn't sure whether it was helping or hindering their efforts anymore. While it had saved them once, its influence lingered like a shadow, unpredictable and dangerous. Clara adjusted the containment field settings, trying to stabilize the artifact further. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each action weighed carefully. If she could sever its connection to the ship entirely, maybe they could rid themselves of its influence. But doing so might also disable the upgrades it had provided, the very enhancements that had kept them alive. "You're thinking too hard," Daniel Pierce said from behind her, startling her slightly. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Whatever you're planning, just make sure it doesn't blow us up." Clara forced a smile. "I'll do my best." Daniel studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You've done more than anyone expected, kid. Don't forget that." His words carried a rare warmth, and Clara nodded gratefully. Still, gratitude didn't change their situation. They needed answers, and fast. Hours passed, and the tension aboard the Aegis grew palpable. Supplies dwindled, tempers flared, and exhaustion gnawed at everyone's resolve. Even Ethan found himself snapping at officers over minor issues, though he quickly apologized afterward. The crew understood. They were all stretched thin. Then, just as hope began to fade, the sensors, picked up something unexpected. A faint signal, distant but steady, pulsed across the radar. "Commander," Ryan called out, his voice tinged with excitement. "We've got something. Looks like a distress beacon." Ethan hurried to the main console, his eyes scanning the readouts. "Can we identify the source?" "It's human," Ryan replied after a moment. "Not military, probably civilian. And it's close enough for us to reach if we push the engines." Ethan hesitated, weighing the risks. Civilians meant potential allies or complications. Either way, they couldn't ignore the signal. It might be their only chance. "Set a course," he ordered. "But keep weapons ready. We don't know what's waiting for us." Ryan nodded, adjusting the trajectory. The Aegis shuddered as its engine strained to accelerate, but it obeyed, inching closer to the beacon's location. When they arrived, the sight was both heartbreaking and hopeful. A small colony vessel floated lifelessly in space, its hull scarred and pitted from micrometeorite impacts. Emergency lights blinked weakly along its exterior, and escape pods were scattered nearby, empty and drifting aimlessly. "Looks abandoned," Ryan muttered, scanning the area. "No signs of life." "Send a boarding party," Ethan instructed. "See if there's anything left, supplies, fuel, anything useful." Clara volunteered immediately, eager to stretch her legs and escape the oppressive atmosphere of the alongside Daniel and a few others, she boarded the derelict ship, stepping cautiously into its darkened corridors. The air inside was stale, and the walls bore scorch marks from some past catastrophe. They split up to cover more ground, calling out updates over their comms. Clara wandered into what appeared to be the engineering bay, her heart sinking at the sight of dismantled equipment and stripped wiring. Whoever had fled this ship hadn't left much behind. But then she noticed something unusual. A small terminal, tucked away in the corner, its screen glowing faintly. Curious, she approached it and activated the interface. Fragments of data scrolled across the display, detailing repair protocols and emergency procedures. More importantly, there was mention of a hidden cache of supplies stored deep within the ship's cargo hold. "This is Lieutenant Bennett," she said into her comm. "I've found something. Meet me in the cargo bay." Moments later, the team regrouped, prying open the sealed doors to reveal crates filled with food rations, medical kits, and spare parts. Cheers erupted among the group, their spirits lifted by the unexpected windfall. "We hit the jackpot," Daniel said, grinning despite himself. Clara nodded, relief washing over her. "Let's load up and get back to the Aegis. This should buy us some time." Back aboard the Aegis, the crew worked quickly to distribute the newfound supplies. Morale improved visibly as stomachs were filled, and injuries tended to. For the first time in days, laughter echoed through the corridors, however brief. But Clara knew their troubles weren't over. As she returned to the lab, she stared once more at the artifact, its glow now barely visible. She realized that while it had brought them incredible power, it had also cost them dearly. Trusting it had been a gamble, one they might never fully recover from. With a deep breath, she made her decision. Pulling up the diagnostic tools, she initiated a final sequence, a complete shutdown of the artifact's energy flow. The process would sever its connection to the ship permanently, disabling the upgrades it had provided. It was risky, but necessary. The artifact resisted, its hum growing louder in protest. Sparks flew from the containment chamber and the lights flickered wildly. Clara gritted her teeth, refusing to back down. Finally, with a sharp crackle, the artifact went silent, its glow fading completely. The Aegis shuddered briefly as its systems adjusted to the loss of alien enhancements. When the tremors subsided, the ship felt ordinary again. Slower, weaker, but stable. Clara slumped into her chair, exhausted but relieved. Whatever secrets the artifact held, they would remain, buried for good this time. Later, Ethan gathered the senior staff in the briefing room. The mood was somber but hopeful. They had survived against impossible odds, proving that even the most broken things could find purpose. "I want to thank all of you," Ethan began, looking around the table. "What we've accomplished here, it's nothing short of miraculous. We took a ship everyone called useless and turned it into a legend." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But our journey isn't over. We still have a long way to go, and I won't lie, it's going to be tough. but we've shown we can handle tough. Together, we'll make it home." The room fell silent, the weight of his words lingering in the air. One by one, the officers nodded, their expressions resolute. As the meeting ended, Clara lingered behind, approaching Ethan privately. "You did the right thing," he said softly, anticipating her thoughts. Shutting down the artifact, it was the only choice. Clara nodded, though doubt still lingered in her eyes. "Do you think we'll ever understand what it really was?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe someday. But for now, let's focus on staying alive." Outside the viewport, the stars burned brightly, indifferent to the struggles of those who sailed among them. The Aegis continued onward, battered but unbroken, carrying the hopes of its crew into the vastness of space. And somewhere, deep inside, the artifact lay dormant, its secrets waiting patiently for another day.